Yo, what's up guys, it's Tbag and I'm with the one and only AlmightyDaq, the guy who leaked Battlefield 1 last year with at least 90% accuracy, and he's back for an interview right now. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good, and hopefully this time we're aiming for 99% accuracy.
You were pretty spot on with your Battlefield 1 leak. In terms of your source, is the source like the same? Is it as legit as your Battlefield 1 leak, this leak?
Absolutely. You can confide in the information that you're getting.
Okay.
That should be no doubt.
Okay, so for the people who are watching this video right now, this interview, we're gonna split it up into two parts. The first part, we're gonna talk about Battlefield World War II or Battlefield 1944 or 1945, however it's gonna be named. It's not confirmed yet, right? It doesn't have a title yet.
No, it doesn't. It's just now entering playtesting. The title, like I mentioned with my Battlefield 1 video, where the title was still up in the air even in March.
Yeah.
And we're currently in December, so it definitely isn't even anywhere near being a solid title.
Okay, interesting, because yeah, like you said, back when you leaked Battlefield 1, it was at a way later stage than what Battlefield 2018 is right now, right?
Absolutely, and just for a preface for anybody watching right now, you have to understand that when I leaked Battlefield 1, it was in March, and the information available to me was more extensive than it currently is. But of course, I'm going to do my best to answer the questions to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
And that may not be to the specificity, if I said that word right,
Yeah,
specificity to as Battlefield 1's video. Of course, as time comes, probably around February or March, I'll be able to give an extremely specific video overview of weapons, maps, down to what they're called, down to specific spots, although I do know a good bit of them currently.
Yeah, and we're gonna go over them in this interview right now. So we have like a little bit of a list that some viewers told me to ask you, some questions of my own and some general questions that I believe everybody would question you about if they had the chance like I do right now. So I'm gonna start off with the first thing. We're gonna wait with multiplayer a little bit. I want to talk about the campaign first, because in Battlefield 1 we had a new type of campaign like the war stories, and some people liked it, some people didn't really like it. I was kind of in the middle. I would presume people who liked Battlefield 1 would want to see something similar like that, but what can we expect? Do we expect something like Battlefield 1 where we have like those war stories, or are we gonna watch something like Band of Brothers like Call of Duty World War II has right now?
To answer that question, I would say that we're going to get a mixture of the Band of Brothers types, in the sense that we're going to have different stories, but they all tie into each other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think it does. Let me ask you another question regarding the campaign. A lot of people notify each other like, hey, for the last, I don't know how many World War II titles, we always see like an American perspective. Is it going to be any different this time?
To answer that, I would say that we won't really see a change to that, as EA and DICE know their audience. They know a majority of people that buy the game are both European, but mainly American.
Yeah.
So I don't expect to see a change in that.
Interesting. So if I think of a World War II title, I would immediately think Saving Private Ryan type of story, you know what I mean? Is it something like that, or like will there be like a couple of surprises for us?
There'll be surprises, but what you're saying,
like,
with don't
spoil
Ryan,
obviously the campaign. Don't just tell us what you can tell us, but without spoiling the campaign. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So we'll have the different perspectives, much like Battlefield 1, but under one single storyline. So it'll kind of be like Saving Private Ryan, but not that storyline. It'll be where you're taking it from the perspective of multiple soldiers, but perhaps in the same platoon, perhaps in the same squad.
Okay, wow, that sounds actually very interesting. Moving on from the campaign, a little bit more general, like obviously it's gonna be World War II, and I'm gonna talk about the time period World War II, but is it the whole war, the whole World War II, or is it just gonna be a specific year, for example like 1943? I'm just saying something right here, but is it like the
Absolutely.
whole war from the beginning to the end, or?
Well, for the meat of the campaign, at least, it's within a specific time period. But for the multiplayer, they're taking the liberty of expanding the entire range of the war, so that they can get the most amount of content out of both weapons, vehicles, maps.
Okay, that's very interesting because you mentioned, I believe, in a video of yours that it will be following kind of the similar footsteps of Battlefield 1 in terms of historical accuracy. How will that be a factor in Battlefield World War II?
On World War II, we're going to see a lot of prototype weapons that weren't for the most part used, but they were definitely conceptually available to the military at that time.
So it's gonna be in the time period of World War II still.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get a few surprises that are hidden gems that history nerds would have to really dig to find.
Okay.
But that's what EA and DICE, well, that's what DICE does best. They're pretty good when it comes down to getting their historical accuracy right and making sure that they're not just shoving in some made-up concept for a gun.
Definitely. And speaking about guns, in terms of the gunplay, you mentioned obviously 2 leaks, Battlefield World War II and Battlefield Bad Company 3, and
yes,
those 2 have a kind of different style of gunplay. What kind of gunplay can we expect from Battlefield World War II? Obviously we're gonna get into Battlefield Bad Company 3 later on, but for now let's stick to Battlefield World War II. What kind of gunplay can we expect?
We can expect very casual-ended gameplay, much like Battlefield 1. They're borrowing a lot of resources from the Battlefield 1 game, so it's no surprise that you're going to see similar movements, similar gun game mechanics. For example, the random bullet deviation, which some people aren't a fan of and some people are a fan of. We'll definitely see that back in the game.
So they have like the same kind of rock, paper, scissors mechanic in terms of guns.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, honestly, I don't know how to feel about that. We'll just have to wait and see. I know a lot of people are, to be honest, not a big fan of the random bullet deviation and the casual gunplay, but if they can make up for it with different types of content, we'll just wait and see. Let's put it like that.
Absolutely. From just expanding on that a little, if anything, EA and DICE will perhaps minimize the amount of bullet deviation, but it'll still be a mechanic in the game.
Exactly, yeah. No, roger that. Now about the maps. What can you tell us about the maps? For example, obviously we're gonna have like operations on D-Day. We're gonna play on like the inner cities of Berlin, Normandy, and stuff like that. Can you like tell us what kind of maps we'll see? Is it mostly like close quarters or mostly open fields or something like that? Can you give me also a little bit information about that?
Absolutely. So the maps aren't constrained much like previous Battlefield games. It's taking an approach from Battlefield 1 where it's a very open map and you can't really tell where the map ends, much like on Battlefield 1 where you're playing on Monte Grappa and you're kind of just looking out into the distance and you can't really tell where the map definitively ends. And that's the perspective that DICE is trying to push for this game, because it's a major war. It's one of the biggest wars in human history.
Yeah.
And I think as far as settings for these maps, we're going to expand everywhere. We're going to move around a lot of places, much like BF1, where, for example, we're gonna see the Eastern Front, and when I say Eastern Front, I mean like the Russian front.
Awesome. That sounds awesome. Talking about the map still, I know Battlefield 1 launched with, I believe, 9 maps, and after I believe 2 or 3 months they introduced a new map called Giant Shadow, which was a revamped single-player campaign map, if you will. So there would be in total 10 maps. How many maps will Battlefield 2018 come with?
It'll come with 10 as a base. You won't have to pay for anything more than 10. So whether or not the last one that they release is rushed or they take their time with it, much like Battlefield 1, it's very much a given that we're going to get 10 maps for free without paying for premium.
Okay, so 10, at least 10 base maps.
Yes.
Okay, and what I say base maps, let's a little bit just talk about premium, because will Battlefield 2018 have premium?
Well, looking at Star Wars Battlefront 2, the reason why they didn't implement premium was because of the loot boxes and all of the microtransactions that are within the game. And EA is not pushing for that to happen, especially with their most coveted title, which is, of course, Battlefield. What they're going to be doing is they're going to be releasing premium and all the cosmetics. And I'm sorry to kind of just like shift the conversation towards microtransactions. But the microtransactions are going to work much like BF1, where you get loot boxes, but they're completely cosmetics. There's not going to be any type of content that is locked behind loot boxes whatsoever.
Yeah. So we will have the premium system.
Yes.
So let's talk about the cosmetics, because customization is a big deal in Battlefield, especially since the last Battlefield, Battlefield 1, did kind of lack customization. At least in my opinion, and I believe in 90% of the gaming community also agree with me that customization wasn't a big selling point for Battlefield 1. How much is that different in Battlefield 2018?
Well, from the customization standpoint, we're not going to look at something like Battlefield 4, where they had extensive customization, just to keep the authenticity to the game to some extent. Or we don't want German soldiers running around in like red camo guns, whatnot.
Yeah.
So we're gonna keep it somewhat authentic, but there's gonna be more customization than Battlefield 1 with specific patterns on your gun, much like Battlefield 1 did. Although we're taking it much further, especially with your secondaries, primaries, and your character. But as far as character customization goes, I know that a few questions on my YouTube specifically, they asked about if we're going to be able to customize our face, how our soldier looks, and that isn't really an option. It's more what he's wearing, the camo that he's wearing, and the camo that are on his weapons.
Okay, so specific facial customization is not really a thing, but like you mentioned earlier, gun customization will be a feature, like in terms of skins, and that same goes for the soldier.
Absolutely.
Okay, so will you unlock skins, or will you unlock like certain items, for example a new helmet or new boots, or is it like skins, like a preset?
A preset. There's no specifics like boots, helmets, and none of that.
Speaking about guns, this is going to be very important for a lot of people. I know in World War II they did have not a whole lot, but they did still use bayonets. Is there gonna be bayonet charging in World War II, in Battlefield World War II?
We won't have the bayonet charge. However, we will have bayonets on certain guns, and you'll be able to melee with them. Although it won't be the same as the bayonet charge, of course.
So talk a little bit about the melee system in Battlefield 2018.
So I think DICE has found a sweet spot for melee after learning that counter knifing didn't really work out too well in Battlefield 4. And Battlefield 1 hit melee pretty well apart from the bayonet charge, where it's not an instant kill. Of course, if you come up behind them, it will be, but
yeah.
They're definitely transitioning into this melee system onto Battlefield World War II.
Okay, interesting. And now we talked about the maps, we talked about the guns and customization. Let's talk a little bit about specific vehicles, if you go a little bit in depth on that, because we obviously in World War II compared to World War 1, tanks did a 180 in terms of technology, and I believe air vehicles as well. Can you talk about a little bit about air vehicles and just ground vehicles and vehicles overall, maybe even submarine, boats, whatever you're going to tell us?
Absolutely. So from transportation vehicles, we're of course going to have the little boats, rib boats and whatnot, similar to Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, where we have boats. And the horses, for the most part, are killed out of the game. There are no horses in Battlefield World War II. I know that a majority of people didn't like the horses in Battlefield 1. I think DICE really took that and they learned from, not their mistake, but from their addition of horses in World War 1. As far as tanks go, you're right in that tanks took massive leaps from Battlefield 1 to Battlefield World War II, in the sense that a lot of vehicle players that are used to manning their own tank, like in Bad Company series and in the Battlefield series, they weren't really pleased with Battlefield 1 in that they had to share their tank, and they could either be the driver or the shooter. There was no, you can be both, except for with the smaller tank, of course.
Yeah.
But moving on to the World War II game, we have tankers who can do both now, where you have a main battle tank you can fire and you can move around, and I think it'll please a lot of the vehicle players that were fanatics of the tank gameplay from previous Battlefield titles.
Yeah.
So there's that for them, and I think that'll help alleviate a little bit of the distress found in vehicle players.
So the vehicle gameplay will be more go towards the Battlefield 4 vehicle gameplay, and a little bit less from the Battlefield 1 vehicle gameplay.
I wouldn't say it goes towards the BF1 gameplay, because vehicles for the most part have stayed the same throughout the Battlefield series. It's just the positioning of of what the driver can do.
Yeah.
And for the most part, in all Battlefield series, apart from Battlefield 1, the driver of the tank has been able to both pilot and fire from his main turret, and we're going to see that return.
And will we also see, like Battlefield 1, auto repair functions?
No.
Okay, so that's a good thing, at least in my book, because back in, for example, Battlefield 4, you actually had to hop out and use your repair tool to repair your vehicle. And that was obviously specific towards the engineering class. And will we see the same kind of class system in
the class system
2018?
Yes, we should see the class system go assault, engineer, support, and then recon. Although the weapons within the class may differentiate from previous titles, but we should see the base titles of the classes come back.
So, for example, the medic or the assault would be the medic, I presume.
Yes.
Will it be, for example, handling, like Battlefield 1, self-loading rifles, as in Battlefield World War II it would be, for example, the M1 Garand, or will it have the Thompson machine gun, or will the Thompson machine gun be more towards the engineering class?
I believe the Thompson is a carbine, and if it follows Battlefield tradition, it should go to the engineer, but automatic, what would be considered assault rifles, should be going all to the medic.
Okay, that's very interesting. And we talked about, like, just to go back to the vehicles a little bit, you talked about tanks and boats. How about air vehicles? Because I am a big fan of jets, or at least aircraft. Will it be more towards the gameplay like Battlefield 4, where you had like those awesome dogfights, or will it be more like slow-paced air combat like in Battlefield 1?
So the facticity of air warfare changed a lot from World War I to World War II. So we're seeing a modernization of a lot of the planes, especially from the Germans and the Americans, and especially the Japanese. The Japanese, for sure. We have planes that are much faster than Battlefield 1, and I think the gameplay will be a lot more intense than it was. It'll go back towards Battlefield 4, Battlefield 3, but it won't nearly be as intense as those games, because we're talking warfighters compared to jets, literal jets.
Yeah, true. Because one thing that I liked about Battlefield 4 system in terms of the air combat is that you can choose. For example, in Battlefield 1 you chose your loadout. For example, you had your ground attack or your dogfighter loadout. You had specific loadouts. And in Battlefield 4, for example, you can change your main cannon and your secondary weapon on your jet. Will we see for the vehicles specific loadouts, like preset loadouts, or can you customize, like we mentioned earlier on customization, can you customize your main cannon will be a, for example, canister shell, etc., etc.?
We'll be able to customize our vehicles a lot more, building onto the point you just said.
Yeah.
But to expand just a little bit more on the air vehicles specifically, a perfect example of the air vehicles is going back to the original Battlefield 1942, where I think it was also available on the PS3 for online, if I'm not wrong.
1943?
1943, my bad, yes. It should play a lot like that, where the dogfights are a lot more skill-based.
That's awesome. Now we're gonna move on to, like, you mentioned different types of factions. You mentioned the Japanese. What kind of faction will we see? Obviously we'll see the US, the Germans, but who more?
So apart from that, we're obviously going to see the Soviets. The USSR had probably the most impactful influence in the war, in that they just threw soldiers at the Germans. Once they swapped sides, they just threw soldiers. And one of the maps is between the not the US faction, but the German faction versus the USSR faction, and it's probably going to be one of the most hectic maps.
And talking about faction, are we going to see like faction-specific weapons? For example, as a Japanese soldier, you can't equip the M1 Garand, or is that free liberty?
So to answer that question, it's limited to the faction for a good amount of time. If you remember Battlefield 3, you had locks on your guns until you got to a certain level, and then they were free to use no matter your faction.
Like in Battlefield Hardline, you had your robbers guns and your police guns, and then eventually you could use both.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now talking about something that will rival Call of Duty in a sense. Obviously, Call of Duty's latest title is World War II, and they added a lot of gore in terms of you can shoot off limbs with a lot of blood and you name it. Will we see something similar in Battlefield 2018? Because Battlefield has always been kind of, if you know what I mean, kind of PG in terms of not excessive amount of blood and no torn off limbs. Will that change in Battlefield 2018?
DICE has always been very, very tame when it comes to their gore, and it shouldn't change with the World War II game. Okay. We're gonna see very tame blood when you're shooting a character or blowing up in an individual or a tank. I think the most graphic we'll get is with the explosion of vehicles. Not to like kind of point this out, but the kamikazing in the Japanese faction in World War II, it's going to be pretty graphic in that sense.
Well, quick question: will we have a specific Japanese kamikaze fighter pilot loadout?
I don't. To answer that, I don't think DICE has the intentions of going, yeah, you're going to ram this jet. I think that's more up to the players, although they know that there are connotations with the Japanese fighter planes.
I understand. Speaking of being PC, a lot of people complained about unhistorical accuracy when it comes to Call of Duty World War II, when you have like black female German soldiers and stuff like that, like very PC and like kind of altering history a little bit just to not upset the social justice warriors. Will Battlefield 2018 follow the same kind of direction as Call of Duty World War II?
To answer that question, it's definitely revisionist history, where we're going back and we're changing things that weren't true, that weren't historically accurate for the sake of social justice warriors.
Yeah.
And this kind of ties into the Gore question that was asked a minute ago, where DICE has kept it really tame, and they're going to play it safe with this as well. They're not going to explicitly use the Nazi emblem. They'll use the Iron Banner, much like Call of Duty did.
Really? So you won't see any swastikas in multiplayer?
At least not right in front of your face. At least not right in front of your face.
Okay. Because I know in Call of Duty World War II in the campaign you had swastikas, but not in the multiplayer. In Battlefield 2018, how is it going to compare to that? Like, will you see at least in the campaign, or? Well,
you'll see swastikas. They're just not going to be the main faction's emblem when you're loading into the game, or when you're starting a multiplayer game, or when the faction wins. It's not going to say Germany, Nazis win, and you're going to have a swastika for your face.
No,
it's not going to be like that.
Yeah, I understand. In terms of like this graphic, I would say graphic content, or at least controversial content, will we see a killing Hitler mission in the campaigin?
That's above my pay grade to answer.
Okay. I thought I might throw it out there. Maybe you had insight on that, but we'll keep it a surprise for now at least. Anyway, I want to thank you for this part of the interview, guys. For the people who are watching, this was the World War II, the Battlefield 2018 World War II interview. We're gonna have a part 2 where we're gonna go more in depth about Battlefield Bad Company 3. Stay tuned for that, and as always, thanks for watching. I see you guys next time. Thank you for AlmightyDaq. Obviously, his links to his channel will be down in the description. Check him out. He's the main guy in this channel right now, so be sure to check him out, and I see you guys next time.